Ladies and gentlemen and ladies, welcome back to another episode of RSL. This is episode 9, and today's video, I'm going solo again, but this time, instead of a March Madness bracket, I'm going to be doing an NFL mock draft, specifically for the first round. Let's get right into it. So, first off, I just want to point out by saying that I've done mock drafts over the years, and I'm pretty decent at it. However, not every single pick is going to be right in the eyes of any fan that watches us, specifically Bengals fans or any other fans of the NFL for any other NFL team. But anyways, I am going to start this mock draft, and the Raiders are obviously on the clock for the first round and for the first pick. We're going with Fernando Mendoza. I feel as if that's a pretty obvious selection considering the Raiders signed Kirk Cousins. But in my opinion, I thought it was a stupid signing considering that even though Fernando Mendoza probably needs a little bit of time to obviously learn behind NFL talent, and it's not a bad signing, the amount that they signed Kirk for was a little bit egregious and a little bit aggressive, considering I don't think anybody was actually going after him specifically. And I'm in personal belief that they should have just drafted Fernando without signing Kirk.
I thought this was the dress rehearsal.
Dress rehearsal? Big Kirko wakes up dripping like this.
You know, he's NFL ready. You know, they were upgrading the O-line with signing Tyler Linderbaum and signing a bunch of other free agents that can help them out. And I'd say that they also need a good receiver. But I am not too sure if they do have another pick in the first round, and it seems like they don't. So unfortunately, they are going to have to be stuck with getting a receiver in the second round, which isn't necessarily bad. Obviously, there are very good, talented receivers that can be picked up in any round. Like there was Puka Nacua, there was Cooper Kupp, there was DK Metcalf, there was Tyreek Hill who got picked. But my point being is that you don't necessarily have to deal with wide receiver just yet. You just need to know the wide receiver enough to understand whether or not they would be a good scheme fit and what they would be able to accomplish on and off the field. But anyways, moving on from the Raiders, I have the Jets picking second, obviously, but they are kind of all over the place. I'm not even sure where to go off of because they obviously need defense after they just traded away both of like their superstar talents in Quinton Williams and Sauce Gardner, which I understand is a good thing because they got a bunch of picks out of it, but where did they even go from here? Because Ruben Bain Jr. would be the obvious selection considering he's definitely a hole that would be filled if they decide to draft him, with edge being a big concern for them. But you also have a big talent like Arvell Reese, who would be a very good pick, but they also need a wide receiver. But then again, Geno Smith is the one throwing to them, so I'm not really sure what that would exactly do for them. They're in a really tough spot right now, but I'd say that in this situation, they would odd to go defense, and I'd say Arvell Reese would be the best selection in this scenario. Now, for the Cardinals, it is a different story. I'd like to go O-line. I could go linebacker. I could go defensive line. It all depends on who is available because the Jets might not go Arvell Reese, which in that case, they would obviously elect to take him. But in this scenario, they need linebacker probably the most, and I'd like to go Sonny Styles. He's probably the most all-around player in the NFL draft. Like he's probably the most talented coming out of it, in my opinion. And that's just me. That's just me speaking. Obviously, other people have different opinions, so I can't really judge them for that. But anyways, the Titans are picking fourth, And in my personal opinion, I see it as a no-brainer to take Jeremiah Love, considering that the offense needs a bunch of help. They did a lot trying to, boost their defense, trying to sign a bunch of other players, and they did a lot trying to sign wide receivers, which is good. And in this scenario, I'd say that they'd either take defense or they go straight for offense and just pick the offensive powerhouse that is Jeremiah Love. And I'm personally just glazing him because I'm a Notre Dame fan. But anyways, I'd say that they either elect to go Ruben Bain Jr. or Jeremiah Love. But I'd say Ruben Bain Jr. only for the fact that they can get a bunch of other talent in later rounds, because this is a really stacked draft, no matter what way you see it. So I'd elect to go Ruben Bain Jr. just because he's been a talent that has been looked at throughout the entire year. He hasn't really moved up or down too much in mock drafts, which is a really good thing because it keeps his stature, it keeps him from being an oddball for NFL teams to really go for him. But for the Giants, I'd personally like to take a wide receiver, and I'd say that the best wide receiver, just like PFF is saying, is definitely Cardinal Tate. I'd say he's got the best talent. He's an Ohio State receiver. Ohio State receivers are notorious for being very good coming out of the draft. I know there's some stick in the mud, such as Marvin Harrison Jr., but you also have to understand that he was playing under a very mediocre quarterback, and I'm not really sure if I can even defend him anymore. It all depends on his third year, I'd say. But anyways, I'd say that the Giants should get another receiver because they cannot just heavily rely on Malik Neighbors. I don't know why that took me so long to remember. Mostly because I'm not a Giants fan, but they cannot mostly rely on Malik Neighbors. They need a second solid receiver to actually throw to besides Wandale Robinson. Gosh. Man, I cannot figure this shit out. But anyways, I'd elect to go Cardinal Tate. There's obviously a little bit of a discussion at them going O-line. There's some discussion at them going with defense, but I'd say the best scenario is for them to draft a receiver. Now for the Browns, I don't understand why they should go quarterback here. I mean, I understand that Shedeur isn't the greatest talent, but at the exact same time, after you pick Fernando Mendoza, you don't really have many other options until like early, middle of second round with Ty Simpson and a bunch of other quarterback talents, such as Garrett Nussmeier, Drew Aller, Carson Beck, Craig Klubnik, the whole shebang, you know. So I'd say I would elect to take an offensive lineman, considering that was their main issue on offense besides receiver going from last season into this season. So I'd say go for the guy who's been very, very talented all season long, who's been highly praised for how long he stayed in the top 10 just for his just for anybody's mock draft. And I'd say go for Francis Magoa, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And for the Commanders, on the other hand, I'd say that they would go Jeremiah Love because this is their biggest need. And I'd say that for all the teams passing up on him, this is like a perfect spot for him to go. I understand that running back should not be going in the first round, but at the exact same time, when you're passing up a talent like Jeremiah Love, I feel as if that's kind of a shot in the foot for anybody doing that. So I'm going to have to pick Jeremiah Love for the Commanders here, just simply because of how talented he is alone. Now for the New Orleans Saints, I would have went Cardinal Tate here just because of the fact that the Ohio State connection with Chris Olave and Tate would be amazing just to watch. However, the odds of him falling with a bunch of other teams before the Saints needing receiver is very slim to none. So I'd say I'd go either Malachi Lemon or I'd go Jordan Tyson, depending on what their scheme fit is and who they're specifically looking for. And just off of it, I'd say Malachi Lemon is the best option for them, just off of where he's ranked in the draft and his talent alone. There's obviously some gripes about him not being able to catch in contention, and he's just not able to come down with the ball in some scenarios. I'll play a few clips where that does happen. But moving on to the Kansas City Chiefs, I'd say that since they lost Trent McDuffie, I'd say that their only logical scenario would either be to pick a safety or a cornerback, because they also lost Brian.
It's Brian Cook, buddy. It
Or just put it
yeah,
up.
it's Brian Cook.
I'm too tired for this.
Bullshit.
But I'd say that they go Mansour Delane just because of the fact that Trent McDuffie was such a big keystone on their secondary that once he left, it was so obvious that they needed help. But for the Bengals, I see that now since they signed Kyle Duggar, this can be a little bit more difficult because you could either draft David Bailey and move some players around to be able to fit every single key defensive position that you need, or you could stick with going with Caleb Downs, which I would also like, or you could go with Dylan Thieneman. But I'd say that with the fact that David Bailey is just here, I'd say it's a pretty good pick to choose David Bailey. But I want to stick with Caleb Downs. I think learning from the back with players such as Jordan Battle or Brian Cook, I finally said it. And then there's also now Kyle Duggar. So I'd say that Caleb Downs would be a very obvious pick here, and that's who I'm going with for the Bengals. But for the Dolphins, there is a little bit of a gripe on who to pick here, but I'd say that since they are really in need of any defensive back, I'd say Jermon McCoy would probably be a good pick. But in their situation right now, they need somebody a little bit more talented on the offensive line, considering that they want Malik Willis to be able to, show as much talent as he possibly can with the best situation that they can put him in. And I can't even spell this guy's name. Eder, could you could you play a little audio clip on how to pronounce this guy's name?
Oliva Vega, Ioane.
I'm going with him out of Penn State. But for the Dallas Cowboys, I'd say David Bailey is probably your best option, considering that you can move him around a lot of places. There's also, the obvious CJ Allen pick. You could go Jermod McCoy as well. But I don't really see that. I'd see them possibly trading down in this scenario if they do elect to. But in this situation, I'd say the best case scenario is to pick David Bailey. They need defensive help either way, and it's probably good with the fact that they need edge. Now for the Rams, I'd say that they go Spencer Fano. You need offensive line, you need linebacker, but it's not really there until pick 18, which you'd probably be reaching in some cases, depending on what the front office thinks. Jordan Tyson's good and all, but what good does it do if he's probably going to be your wide receiver number 3, and he's probably not going to get as much playing time. He's probably not going to get as much experience in his rookie season, and it's probably going to look bad for him, and people are probably going to consider him a bust. So I'd say go for Spencer Fano to fill up one of the tackle positions for them. Now for the Ravens, I'd say that it's a little bit more centered towards getting that key wide receiver, because even though Zay Flowers has been able to really perform like we were expecting him to. I feel as if they really need that number one receiver that just goes off for Lamar and is able to really exceed the expectations in general for the Ravens, because all they've drafted is either receivers who have gotten injured, receivers have surprised them and then left for free agency because they thought that they could take their talents elsewhere, which has actually worked out for them, or they draft a receiver who meets those expectations but doesn't really do too much more other than that. And so I'd say that Jordan Tyson would probably be that pick. However, with the talent that's on the board, I'd say that you would normally go with somebody like a linebacker in CJ Allen. You could go for a guard. You could go for an O lineman, considering that you just released Tyler Linderbaum. That leaves a big hole in your offensive line. And in my personal opinion, it could go either way. But I'd say that since Monroe Freeling is just right here, and there's not really too much more offensive linemen until Blake Miller, I'd say this is probably their best pick that they can get. Now, for the Buccaneers, I've been advocating for them to draft a tight end ever since Gronk left, because obviously there wasn't really one specific tight end that they could actually rely on, and they need more versatility on the offense rather than just relying on either. Why can't I think of their names? You can't rely on Chris Godwin. Mike Evans left, and there is also the problem with all the other receivers, because it just added in post. But I do want them to pick tight end here with Kenyon Sadiq, because I'd say that he's the best tight end in this draft without a shadow of a doubt. And it's good value for them either way. And I'd like to see like a very, very talented tight end just play for the Buccaneers again. You know, they've obviously wanted to fill this hole for years, and I think this is the best time to do it with where they're picking. Now for the Jets, they obviously got this pick from Indianapolis, so they're picking a little bit later, considering that the Colts obviously finished a little bit on the upper end compared to other teams, picking a little bit before. And in my personal opinion, I'd say that you would probably go wide receiver for Jordan Tyson. However, I'd say that you also want to set up your defense for the best chance to win, and I'd say Jermon McCoy is just better value in general. And then there's also the very talented Akeem Mesidor. I've really liked this guy ever since I started watching his highlights. You know, I think he is so underrated, you know, because a lot of people really like Ruben Bain, but they don't really look at Akeem as much because Ruben is like on the other side of the edge, and, you know, they're mostly looking at him trying to, you know, make big plays. And then Akeem is just doing all this other stuff, and yet people aren't really batting much more of an eye than Ruben. So I'd say Akeem Mesidor is like a steal of a pick for them. And for the Lions, I'd say that they could go O-line, they could go linebacker, they could go D-line. But since CJ Allen is right here, I'd say that they go with him. Now for the Vikings, it's a little bit different because they need offensive line, they need defensive line, they need safety. But since Dylan Thieneman is right here, and there's really no running back until Jadarian Price, I'd say it's a no-brainer for them. I could obviously see the Vikings messing up and obviously picking Jadarian Price, but what good is that going to do for them if he's so much of a reach? So I would automatically just go for Dylan Thieneman if he's still there. Now for the Panthers, they need another receiver because Xavier Legette has obviously underperformed in everybody's opinion. So I'd obviously say this is where Jordan Tyson goes, if anywhere. And for the Cowboys, I'd say Jermon McCoy is definitely where he goes, because this is the best place where he can go. It's obviously not a reach considering where he's ranked. So I'd say this is a pretty good steal for them. Now for the Steelers, it is a different story because they need a lot of offense, and I'd say that they'd be reaching. So I'd say that they'd elect to draft or obviously move down in the draft a little bit in the first round. But I'd say like right now they could probably go Blake Miller for this because obviously quarterback isn't going to be available for the second round. I'd say that, they could obviously go for Ty Simpson, but what they could do is like they could trade down and then trade up their second rounder for a higher pick so they can get Ty Simpson in order to train behind Aaron Rodgers for a year. Get that talent really going and really help him blossom in the NFL. And for the Chargers, yeah, I think they need God at this point.
Mario! Dear God! What the hell happened in here?
But anyways, I'd say that their best scenario right now is obviously going O-line. But what good does it do it if they really aren't in the best position to take one right now? So I'd say go for Emmanuel McNeil-Warren, but it kind of depends. I'm not really sure if that's their best pick that they can make. I'd say go O-line just for the hell of it because they need it, but they don't really have any interior offensive linemen going until. And I'm still scrolling. I'm still scrolling. Did I miss somebody? Yeah, Emmanuel Brignon. But I'd say go for I could see them picking Caden Proctor in this situation and then moving him around to guard or moving somebody else to guard to try and to seal that offensive line. Because they lost Zion Johnson in free agency, I believe. So I'd say Caden Proctor would probably be a good pick here. Now, the Eagles would obviously take safety in this scenario. There's obviously Omar Cooper Jr., who played extremely well for Indiana. He was one of the key pieces on why they even won the national championship. But I also see them taking Keldrick Folk. I could also see them advocating for Avion Terrell. But I'd say Emmanuel would probably be the best pick just off of value alone. And then for the Browns, I'd say that they would probably pick Amar Cooper Jr. because they obviously elected to take Francis Magoa. And I feel as if it's only fair that they do take him in that scenario. Now for the Bears, they need a lot of run help. And I'd say Gaten McDonald is probably the best player that they can take in this situation. Because if you want run help, you want somebody who can really fill the gap and make sure that the running back can't get past the offensive line. Or the offensive line can't create any sort of open space for the running back to bulldoze through. And for the Bills, I'd say that they need defense a little bit more than offense as of right now, considering who they just signed, which was DJ Moore, obviously. So they filled up a wide receiver hole, but they also need another wide receiver, I'd say. But I personally would go with either taking Avion Terrell and moving somebody to safety, or taking a linebacker or a defensive lineman such as Peter Woods. He obviously was ranked a lot higher in the draft before then, but I'd say in this situation, it would make sense to them. Now for the 49ers, I think they also need Jesus. Or they need to move away from whatever power plant they're practicing right next to because they keep injuring every single player they put on that field. But enough griping about that. I'd say that there is the situation where you take Keldrick Folk just off of value. There's also the situation where you take an offensive lineman such as Max, Ian Anchor, or you also take Cassius Howell, depending on, where you see a scheme fit working a lot better for any three of them. So I'd say going for Keldrick Folk would probably be their best decision. Now for the Texans, I would elect to go O-line or defensive line. So I'm going to go just based off of picks alone. I'd say Max Ian Anchor. I'm saying that wrong, I guarantee you. But yeah. And for the Chiefs, they are also in a weird place because we picked Mansour Delane, and I'd say that TJ Parker would probably be the next one to go after that. For the Dolphins, now obviously this pick was initially Denver's, but I'd say that they go with Avion Terrell, just based off of, again, value. And for New England, I would elect to go linebacker or defensive line, and I'd say that's where Caleb Banks just falls off the board for them. And for the Seahawks as the last pick of the first round, I would probably go with Cassius Howell. That is my 2026 first round mock draft. Obviously, you guys can make a little bit of a different decision. You can obviously advocate for somebody else in the first round, but this is just, in my opinion, the best place that each player goes and who they get drafted by. But if you guys did enjoy this video, please leave a like, maybe subscribe, and also make sure that you guys comment any opinions that you might have. I'm more than willing to hear some constructive criticism. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.